February is Black History Month, and International Swimming Hall of Fame CEO Bruce Wigo invited NAACP Image Award-winning swim instructor Lee Pitts to speak about the history of African Americans in swimming. Lee Pitts is a nationally and internationally known swim instructor who has appeared on TV programs throughout the world promoting the benefits and joys of swimming. Mr. Pitts also has a best-selling Learn to Swim video program, which is the only one produced and starring an African American swim instructor.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you know?
Yeah, Bruce, I'll be glad to, and I think a lot of the viewers will be surprised to know that all the way back to the days of slavery, there were some great African swimmers. You take B.R. Brent in his memoirs in 1740, he talked about the times when he and his friends, his 13 friends, were engaged in a wonderful activity of swimming. And then they were captured and put onto a slave ship. One minute they were engaged in a beautiful sport of swimming, enjoying themselves, and then they were captured, shackled, and put on a slave ship. So here they are now at the hull of a slave ship, shackled and bound after enjoying the beautiful sport of swimming. And those were some of the great swimmers in West Africa. It's been well documented that in 1679, there was a surviving slave from a shipwreck that took place. This slave swam 60 hours nonstop to the shores where he was rescued. And then there was our good friend York.
Who was York?
York was part of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Many of us are familiar with that from our history books. He was the only slave who was a part of the Lewis and Clark expedition. He was a childhood friend of Clark. He was also Clark's slave, and he was the strongest swimmer on the Lewis and Clark expedition. Took on most of the bulk of the swimming requirements at that time to make that expedition successful. And then there was Tice Davis. Now, Tice Davis is very interesting because we mostly identified the Underground Railroad, the term the Underground Railroad, with Harriet Tubman. Tice Davis, who was a slave from the West Indian origin, he swam the Ohio River. Now, as his slave master was chasing him on a boat across the Ohio River, Davis disappeared. And the slave master, thinking that Davis had died, he said, "Hey, this guy must have taken the Underground Railroad." And that's where that term, the Underground Railroad, came from. Of course, Davis was able to make that swim to safety. For example, Duke Kahanamoku, right here, was a great swimmer. In fact, he was an Olympic champion in 1912 and 1920, a dark-skinned Hawaiian. He did a lot of exhibits around the country, but he was never allowed to swim in the South.
We're standing here at the site of the original casino pool, which was built in 1928 and is what made Fort Lauderdale, Florida, the world capital of swimming. This pool was built in 1928. All the great swimmers of the time, from the late 20s up through till it was demolished in 1965, came here. And it was this tradition of swimming which led to the establishment of the International Swimming Hall of Fame here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. But, Lee, there was an underside to the world capital of swimming in that era. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, you talked about a very sterling history of this International Swimming Hall of Fame in the swimming pool. But what less well known to a lot of people is that at that time, particularly up until 1965, from the building of the pool in 1928, no African Americans were allowed to swim in this swimming pool. So that's a big black spot or dark spot in the history of swimming here in Fort Lauderdale. Here we are, Bruce, on the magnificent Fort Lauderdale beach, world-renowned beach. But prior to the passing of the desegregation bill in the 1960s, African Americans couldn't swim on this beach. In fact, African Americans had a difficult time getting opportunities to swim in the whole beach setting. It was very hot. Just imagine here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, any part of Florida for that matter, where in the drenching 90-degree weather, you couldn't go to the beach. So what they did to accommodate African Americans, they created another beach that was called the Black Beach. Very difficult to get to because you had to take a ferry to the beach. You had to go through the whole logistics of that. And then when you got to the beach, you really felt isolated. And of course, it didn't have all the finer amenities of a beach like this. And but this beach became a very, very important part of the integration of swimming pools and integration of other facilities in the area. A lot of our people are familiar with the fact that during the civil rights movement, African Americans and whites as well used restaurants, hotels, and things of that like to do what was called sit-ins. This was to dramatize the fact that African Americans who were American citizens could not use restaurants and hotels and things of that nature in America. So another thing that dramatized that was the use of water, pools, and beaches. Those were called wade-ins, a la sit-ins, wade in. And so they would come here and get into the water and traumatize the fact that they couldn't get in the water. And then, of course, when the police came in and made it more of a public appearance, and the fact that they couldn't, photographs were taken, that moved the civil rights movement along. And it was a very, very, very big deal back then to see an African American or people of African descent actually swimming, very few clothes on, in water, intermingling with white people at the time. So the swimming pools, the beaches, particularly like in areas like here in Fort Lauderdale, that is, did a great job in moving forward the progress of blacks in America.
We're here at the International Swimming Hall of Fame Aquatic Complex in February of 2007 at a United States swimming swim meet. And Lee, you've made some interesting observations about what's taking place behind us.
Yes, Bruce, the observation is pretty factual. That here it is in 2007. The world has changed a lot, but it hasn't changed in terms of swimming. You still see right here where you have very few African Americans participating in the swim meet. In fact, in U.S. swimming, that's less than 1% of African Americans who are registered in U.S. swimming. And that's a tragedy in itself, because when you go back in history, before slavery, Africans who were on the west coast of Africa arguably were some of the greatest swimmers of all time. And still, we don't see more African Americans participating here in one of the wonderful sports of swimming. Forget about all the myths and all the problems. Think about this. The history that we just explored of Africans and African American swimmers is a very exciting and rich history. If you want to know more about that history, just download it. Black Splash, the history of African American swimmers.